In the 1970 census, there were counted just 100 centenarians. Today there are over 10,000. It is to the credit of society that we look after them and not dispose them as useless eaters in line with Third Reich principles. But this altruistic attitude can lead to its own problems. The old may be useless eaters, but they tend to have more money than the next generation, but are prone to dementia. A dilemma of which there is no obvious answer unless we wish to dispose of them. We love our parents, but do we love our in-laws? The mother-in-law joke is a staple of all comedians, yet it hides a hideous truth. How many viewers could honestly say that the death of one's spouse's parents would cause uncontrolled grief? Up to their death, precious time is spent looking after them or visiting them. As an in-law, you do not remember any wonderful childhood memories. All you see is a decrepit human being drifting towards the other side. All cities wish to preserve an image to outsiders that is wholesome. In the case of Bath, the city fathers wish to emphasize such attractions as the Roman baths or its elegant streets. In addition, it wants to remind visitors of great writers, such as Jane Austen, beloved of television costume dramas on Sunday night. But Bath has a darker side, and the green eye of unrequited greed is not far from the surface. Over to you, James, to reveal the awful depths that can occur.
This episode focuses on events that unfolded during the mid-1930s in the west of England and concern the case of Reginald Hinks, in a case that shocked the whole of England. Hinks had reached the age of 30 and had not really achieved much in his life, having been discharged from the army and dismissed from numerous jobs in London, where he resided, and to make matters worse, had committed numerous petty crimes. He decided to move to Bath in Somerset, no doubt looking for a fresh start and new opportunities, and initially it looked like a good move. He gained employment with Hoover as a door-to-door salesman. During his street-by-street routine, he knocked on the door of Constance Ann Jeffreys, who was a divorced single mother with a daughter who at the time was 5 years old. Hinks immediately took a shine to her and asked her out, and after a few short weeks they got married, and he moved in with her. Also living at the house was Constance's elderly father of 81 years. The house was at Milton Avenue in the Bear Flat area of Bath, known to this day as Poets' Corner, due to the streets being named after famous British poets. The area is a short walk from the city centre, and to this day is considered to be fairly affluent. Hinks soon discovered that his new wife was quite well off for the time, having received in the past an inheritance of £2,000, which is around £125,000 in today's money. Her father, a Mr. James Pullen, was not in good health and needed constant nursing by his daughter, and in his own right owned numerous properties which made him a wealthy man. It did not take Hinks long to dishonestly get his hands on £1,000 from the father, some of which went straight into his pocket, while the rest was used to buy a larger house in the nearby Inchcombe Lane. After the move, over time the father's health steadily declined further, and he was diagnosed as suffering with senile dementia. This frustrated Hinks, who wanted to get his hands on Mr. Pullen's cash, but the old man continued to live seemingly content in his new surroundings. A nurse had been engaged as the father's carrying needs increased over the successive months, but this did not fit into Hinks's plans, as it was a cost that was eating away at the father's wealth, so he decided to dismiss the nurse and take on the role of carer himself, in the process starting a deliberate plan to end the life of the elderly man. This plan, as it turned out, became rather bizarre. He would take a decrepit Mr. Pullen into the crowded city centre and abandon him there in the hope that the poor man would meet a natural death by being run over or by the very cold weather at the time. Pullen was once found wandering down a country lane, followed at a distance by Hinks in his warm car. None of these ploys seemed to work. The elderly man continued to live. Hinks decided that more drastic action was needed. In November, a telephone call was made by Hinks to the local police and ambulance service, asking them to come to the family home in English Combe Lane. The story he told them during the phone call was that Hinks, as the old man's carer, had been helping him take a bath and had left for a few moments to collect some fresh clothes. On his return, he had found Mr. Pullen lying in the bath in a lifeless state, with his head under water. On investigation of the bathroom, the old man was found to be sitting up in the bath in a remarkably healthy state. It was the following evening that Hinks made a similar call to the emergency services, and on arriving at the house were informed by Hinks that a terrible accident had happened and that Mr. Pullen had accidentally gassed himself. The old man's body was found lying next to the gas cooker on the kitchen floor, and indeed discovered to be lifeless. A quick note on gas: please don't try this at home. Up until the 1970s, each town had their own gasworks, using a process that extracted gas from coal. Too much of it in an unventilated space would kill you, and there were a number of suicides each year where people literally gassed themselves to death. The gas we use today is extracted from deep underground, and inhaling too much will just give you a bad headache. Back to the now deceased Mr. Pullen. His body, as noted in reports, showed all the signs of gas poisoning, although there was no residual smell of gas when the police arrived at the house, as would be expected in the kitchen. Note was also made of the fact that the shelves had been removed from the oven and an overcoat had been draped over it, no doubt to stop any escape of gas. The body also had a bruise on the back of the head. Was it possible that an elderly and infirm man who was senile could possibly have carried out this elaborate suicide? The doctor involved thought not. A post-mortem concluded that the bruise on the back of the head was recent and was consistent with Pullen falling backwards or being struck from behind. The blow itself would have rendered the victim unconscious, which would have meant that he would not have been able to put his head in the oven or fight back if he was pushed there by someone else. The inquest was held over several weeks, as the coroner tried to get to the bottom of what really happened. At the beginning of the proceedings, the coroner advised Hinks that he did not have to answer any questions put to him unless he wished to. Nonetheless, Hinks said he was happy to make a voluntary statement, stating that Pullen quite often had falls, and in the preceding 2 or 3 weeks before his death had fallen 3 times. Hinks had given up work 4 months before the old man's death in order to look after him, and washed him twice a day, shaved him twice a week, and aided with a weekly bath. A regular daily routine had been initiated. After breakfast, Pullen would sit outside the house and listen to the wireless if the weather permitted. There would be periodic trips into the centre of the city. During this time, Hinks stated on several occasions Pullen had talked about suicide, as he did not like living in his frail state. Possible methods were apparently throwing himself in front of a train, cutting his throat, jumping into the river, or even out of a high window. He was tired of life and didn't want to be a drag on the family. The evening before his death, Hinks had given Pullen his usual weekly bath, leaving for a few moments to fetch some clothes. This was when, Hinks claimed, he found his father-in-law with his head submerged under the water. He pulled Pullen into a sitting position and called his wife, and together tried to revive the elderly man. Hinks surmised that Pullen had tried to get out of the bath and then slipped and fell, banging his head and thereby losing consciousness. On the day of the death, it had been a routine start, and all seemed normal. Hinks noted that Pullen was very wobbly on his feet and refused any help in a strong-willed tone of voice. After breakfast, Pullen played with his granddaughter, while his daughter and Hinks tidied the kitchen. It was then that the little girl came running to her parents, screaming that Grandad had stood up from his chair, intending to go to the sideboard, and was very unsteady. At that point, Hinks heard a dull thud from the living room, and running next door found Pullen on the floor complaining that he had fallen over and hit his head. A little later in the day, an obviously confused Pullen decided that he would walk to Dorking. He did not get far, as Hinks soon found him and brought him home in his car, and on arrival Pullen fell asleep in a chair. Mrs. Hinks went out to the shops in the afternoon, leaving her husband in charge of the household. After supper that evening, Mrs. Hinks again left her husband in charge, while she went out to the cinema. Some time later, Pullen declared that he wanted to go for a walk, a request that was declined because it was too late in the day for such exercise. Not half an hour later, the elderly man again tried to leave the house, stating that this time he was off to see friends. Hinks told him that he had no friends that were still alive, and managed to persuade him to sit down again. Hinks continued his voluntary statement of the events leading up to the death of his father-in-law. Later in the evening, Pullen had left the living room, saying he was going to the toilet. Hinks' stepdaughter called from upstairs that her feet were cold in bed and that she wanted a drink of water, whereby he went into the kitchen to sort out the child's request. It was there that he discovered the body of Pullen, with his head in the oven. At this point, he pulled the old man's body away from the cooker, turned off the gas to the oven, and made attempts to resuscitate Pullen, and when this failed, called the ambulance. During the inquest, Hinks was asked about a cheque which was made payable to Pullen, the proceeds of which had been used for the purchase of the house in English Combe Lane. Hinks' reply was that Pullen owned a number of properties, some of which were in Dorking, including a shop which had been condemned by the local council. On advice from his solicitors, Pullen had sold the shop, the proceeds of which was £900. Pullen had endorsed the cheque in favour of his daughter, who at some stage handed it over to Hinks. The money had been used to buy the English Combe Lane house, some furniture and a car. Hinks added, perhaps in a guilty voice, "Was there anything wrong with the cheque?" It emerged that the sale of the Dorking shop was actually against Pullen's solicitor's advice, contrary to Hinks's claim. The solicitors had also drawn up a new will for Pullen after his wife's death, the main beneficiary being the daughter. The solicitors had concerns about their client's money, since it appeared it was being dissipated by Hinks, and as a result set up what was called a committee in lunacy, in order to protect their client's estate. This in part arose as a result of conversation with Pullen's doctor, whose view it was that the elderly man was not capable of understanding any complex financial transactions. Hinks was instructed that in no way was he to sell any of the property owned by his father-in-law, but by selling the Dorking property, he had bypassed the family solicitors, instead instructing different ones of his own, choosing to complete the sale. Evidence emerged from a witness, a Mr. Hiscox, who claimed that he overheard Hinks saying that he wanted rid of the tiresome old man and wanted him out of the way, as he was a damn nuisance. Hiscox alleged that he was owed money for a new radio, and that Hinks had promised to pay on the 2nd of December, which uncannily was the day after Pullen's death. Hinks had sent Hiscox a postcard saying that Pullen had died and the debt of £7 would be settled after the funeral. Pullen's former nurse, Elizabeth Smith, who was dismissed by Hinks, was also called to give evidence. In it, she spoke of several occasions when Pullen had threatened to take his own life. She also had never heard Hinks argue or have cross words with Pullen, and that the old man was confused by many things around him, including the gas fire in the living room, where he tried to burn old newspapers and poke it with fire irons, as if it was a real fire. Pullen was in a confused state of mind, and was unaware of his wife's death, and would often confuse the nurse with his daughter. It was also the nurse's opinion that due to the frailty of the elderly gentleman, he would have been unable to operate the gas oven, even if he had the mental capacity to plan his own death in such a manner. One of the police officers who had attended the house on the night when the incident occurred told of a statement he had taken from Hinks after the body had been taken away by the undertaker. In it, he told the inquest, Hinks had tried to explain away the bruise on the head, saying it must have happened when Pullen's head hit the floor when he was pulled out of the oven, adding that the old man was still alive when he was rescued. He had pulled him away from the stove by the ankles, turned off the gas and opened the window before trying to revive the victim. Evidence was given by Mrs. Hinks, the daughter, who confirmed her father's suicidal statements, which had occurred for several years, and that he was prone to wandering off by himself without anyone with him on numerous occasions. Her husband had always treated her father with kindness and was always very patient. It is reported that the strain in giving evidence for over 2.5 hours caused her to faint a number of times. Having heard all of the testimonies, the coroner's jury retired to come to their conclusion. This took a matter of half an hour, and they returned the damning verdict of wilful murder by Hinks, to which he muttered, "Well, that's a shame." He was promptly arrested. Hinks made a brief attendance at Bath Magistrates' Court, where he wept silently in the dock, waiting to be dealt with. It took the magistrates only a few minutes to remand Hinks in prison for 1 week, to allow time for the Crown Prosecution Service to decide their course of action, and curiously, for legal aid to be applied for by the defendant. Hinks was subsequently committed for trial at the Old Bailey in London on the charge of wilfully murdering his father-in-law. He made this riposte to the court, saying, "I have nothing to say and nothing to fear. The whole thing is absurd." The trial commenced on the 5th of March 1934 and was really a repeat of the proceedings at the inquest, with a few dramatic differences. One of these was evidence given by a doctor who said that the bruise on the back of Pullen's head could have been caused by it being hit on the floor in the process of his rescue. He had carried out some experiments, which led to his conclusion. In spite of the doctor's efforts, it was not believed. Other medical evidence was presented that was of the opinion that the bruise had been caused prior to death. It was perhaps a deliberate act by Hinks to stun his victim so that he could be placed in the oven without a struggle. Hinks gave evidence for 3.5 hours, during which he absolutely denied causing harm to his father-in-law, emphasizing the suicidal nature of the deceased. When queried about his resuscitation efforts, Hinks replied that he did not want to go over the ghastly features again, and that it was more than he could stand. The trial continued until the 10th of March, and having heard all of the evidence, the jury retired to debate the facts and come to their decision. They believed the findings of the post-mortem, and that the bruise on Pullen's head had been inflicted before he had inhaled any gas, adding that the accused had struck the blow in order for the victim not to be able to defend himself. Hinks was found guilty of murder, and there was only one outcome. Mr. Justice Branson passed the death penalty. Hinks was hung at Bristol Prison by the renowned hangman Thomas Pierpoint on the 3rd of May 1954. Now, John, this is a bizarre set of events, but what are your thoughts?
What is one to make of this story? We are reminded that equity release could enable the next generation to join the property ladder. This may convince your in-laws not to put roller skates at the top of the stairs. There's an old song from Eddie Cantor that goes as follows. How do we keep them on the farm when they see gay Paris? This was the reason for Hinks's behavior. For the first time, he got the taste for the good life, far out of any hope of sudden wealth except the lottery. If you would like to know more about this episode and the other West Country murders in this series, you can visit our website vintagemurders.uk or on our YouTube channel.